Hello, everyone. This is another episode of the Unisolve Question, which is a YouTube show and podcast about lawyers. Today, we have Evan Thomas, head of legal with Wealthsimple Crypto, here with us. Hello, Evan.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Please tell us who you are. Tell us about yourself.
It probably comes as no surprise to anyone. I'm a lawyer. I recently joined Wealthsimple to head up legal for the Wealthsimple Crypto product a couple of months ago. Prior to that, I practiced litigation for going on 15 years for Osler in Toronto, mainly doing sort of defense side commercial class action litigation with a particular emphasis on technology. Related matters. I'm originally from Western Canada, grew up in Alberta, educated in various other provinces, found my way to Toronto a few years ago and haven't left. And I have my family here in Toronto, my wife and two kids.
And Wealthsimple Crypto, as you said, is a product. It's not a separate company, correct?
That's right. It's what I mean. It can. Without dwelling on too many of the details, technically, Wealthsimple Crypto is provided by a company called Wealthsimple Digital Assets, but it is one of the products that Wealthsimple as an organization provides to Canadians, in addition to Wealthsimple Invest, which is it's a robo-investing product that is the first product, and I think what we're primarily known for, Wealthsimple Trade for no fee trading, Wealthsimple Tax, which assists with tax preparation, Wealthsimple and Wealthsimple Crypto being another, and then our Wealthsimple Work, which provides products for companies for their employees.
Well, everyone knows what a bank is. Everyone knows what an investment broker is, what an investment advisor is. What is Wealthsimple? Is it a completely new type of company that offers completely new type of products? How is it different from traditional financial companies?
We're offering some services that are similar to other products that are already available in the market, but trying to do it in a different way and in a better way, and particularly a friendlier way. And I missed one in particular as well, Wealthsimple Cash, which is our product for similar to products in the US for instant money transfer. So do these services exist to a certain extent? I mean, there are now other robo investing products. There are other low fee, no fee stock trading platforms. There are relatively few platforms that allow people in Canada, at least, to transfer to money back and forth with their friends and family in an easy way. And there are crypto platforms that have allowed people to buy and sell crypto online. I think there are some distinguishing factors, in particular when it comes to crypto, in that until recently, really until Wealthsimple Crypto existed, there were no regulated options for doing so. These platforms existed outside regulation in Canada. But in addition to that distinction, we like to think that the products we offer are better, they're more integrated, they're more friendly, and that they're better able to help people achieve their financial freedom, which is ultimately what our mission is all about. And all of these products are really intended to help our customers achieve that objective.
You have quite a blue chip background. I want to talk about your path to Wealthsimple. Wealthsimple is your current station, but you covered quite a lot of ground before getting there. So you already said that you were from Alberta. Were you born in Alberta?
I was. I grew up in Edmonton, and I was born an Oilers fan, and I will die an Oilers fan, regardless of how well they might do.
Wow, you're not the first distinguished guest of this show who was born in Edmonton, by the way. So Edmonton seems to be a hotspot for interesting people. You, however,
Full of distinguished individuals, full of distinguished individuals.
everyone go Edmonton. You went to University of BC for your undergrad, though, right? So what made you leave Alberta and go to BC? Why didn't you just go to Toronto? I mean, everybody knows it's the center of the universe.
Uh, you're asking me to reach back into history. And at that time, I was doing economics. That was what I wanted to study in university. And UBC had and continues to have a really excellent economics program. And really, who could quarrel with living in Vancouver? I always like to say there's really only two ways of living in Vancouver. You either have to be a student, or you have to be incredibly wealthy. And at the time and still today, only one of those options was available to me. So I decided to be a student in Vancouver and attend UBC, which is a fantastic experience. It's a beautiful, very livable city. The university is fantastic, and like just about everybody who attends UBC, it took me 5 years to complete a 4-year degree because, frankly, it's hard to keep your mind on your studies.
As I'm looking at your education, I'm noticing that the next program was at LSE, which is another blue chip institution on the list here. But before LSE, London School of Economics and Political Science, you had a 2-year gap. Is this when you did software development?
The suspicious resume gap. Yeah, all through my undergrad studies, even though I was studying economics, I was very involved in sort of technology, working in doing software development, systems administration, part-time summer jobs through university. And then after I came out of university right into the dot-com boom, which at least some people will remember, and worked for a couple of startups at that time doing software development. And we had, what were great ideas, what I still think were great ideas. But like many startups at that time, eventually ran out of money, and everybody had to find other things to do. So that was when I was considering, where do I go from here? I was very interested in the technology sector, but I didn't think that was the right path for me at that time. So decided, I'd pursue and eventually go to law school, but I also wanted to continue what I've been doing in economics. So I did the economics degree in the UK before starting law school. So that's what you are correct. That gap on my at least in my public profile, that's where I spent a couple of years doing software development for dot-coms, which ultimately did not succeed, and I had to go in another path.
Well, I wouldn't call it not succeeding, because at the end of the day, it took you to, I think it contributed to your landing at Wealthsimple. Your knowledge of technology ultimately helped you become interested in crypto, did it not?
That's right. I've been all through law school, and then through my practice in litigation. In law school, I took a number of courses focused on technology and innovation, and then in my practice, I found myself drawn to the cases that had a technology element, whether that was a privacy or data security matter, like a security incident, privacy breach, resulting class actions, or some sort of investigation or enforcement matter. Commercial disputes in software projects, enforcing commercial data licensing agreements where data is being commercial data, not personal information, is being licensed for sale. Those kinds of disputes where I could really leverage the technical background I had, where I could speak relatively fluently with the technologists who were invariably involved in those kinds of cases, and it provided a real advantage, and I think helped sort of build trust with the clients, because I could speak to many of the key stakeholders in the language that they best understood. And so from within that, I was eventually, I guess it'd be about 4 or 5 years ago, drawn to crypto in a professional sense. And this was really as the last big bull run began. We were increasingly seeing it at Osler, where I was at the time, clients coming to us, with business ideas that involve crypto. They required advice. A lot of things, the legal environment was unclear, to be generous. And so, particularly a colleague at the time, and he's now a colleague again, Blair Wiley, Chief Legal Officer at Wealthsimple, we worked together closely on advising these clients. And from my perspective was advising these clients on sort of the risks, the litigation or regulatory risks that they faced, because it was predictable. And indeed, it did come to pass that eventually there would be litigation and investigations and enforcement arising out of some of the business models that were being pursued at that time. So I continued on for a number of years. That was an area of practice, acting for clients either involved in disputes or other contentious matters that had a crypto element, whether or providing advice on risks related to their business activities for a number of years, until recently. So Blair, who was formerly a colleague at Osler, now at Wealthsimple, approached me about the position I'm now in, which is to head up the legal side for Wealthsimple's crypto product.
I still want to jump back to software development, your software development stint at those .coms, because I also was a software developer, and I want to dwell on that a little bit. So what languages and tools did you use during your gig?
So I think for the most involved, the longest stint was with a company, and what we were developing was a tool for integrating equipment rentals into sort of online platforms. So think of it we certainly didn't describe it in these terms at the time, but this is how I describe it now. It was basically Uber, but for equipment rental. So if you're at a job site, you need a forklift or sort of lighting for a job site. The idea is we go to this site, this app, and see which rental provider had the equipment you needed, how far they were away from you, and what they were going to charge, and place a reservation, through this app. And you have to keep in mind, this was 2001. These companies, these equipment rental companies, they had systems for managing their inventory electronically, but they were using this is where we're going to get into the real technical weeds. They were for some reason they were all built on SCO Unix, and they weren't applications that were connected to the internet. So really, what we were providing was a layer that allowed our platform to connect over the internet to the existing inventory management systems, and pull data out, put data in order to make reservations for equipment. It was a great idea, frankly. I wouldn't be surprised if that exists today. We were building on a stack that would sound pretty familiar today. We were sort of a combination of sort of Linux and Apache web servers. We were using mod Perl, programming in Perl, and using Solaris and Oracle for the back end, for all of the database side. So that's a technology stack that would probably be relatively familiar to someone developing 20 years later. Maybe not so much the Perl, but it was primarily Perl. And then we did have some elements that were built in PHP.
You built an access layer to a legacy system as part of your job. You built essentially an adapter between the legacy system and the brand new internet. Don't you think that a lot of fintech is exactly that? It's just an adapter over legacy banking and finance to make it palatable to the modern generation. And to finish the thought, crypto is not that. It's just swipes away the legacy and builds the financial technology from scratch, a completely new, brand new stack. Would you agree with this?
I think generally, I think certainly for traditional financial institutions, a lot of the way in which they've approached fintech and making their products accessible online is to, yes, build a layer that abstracts away the legacy systems, some of which are 30, maybe 40 years old, and then to put a shiny face on it. I think for fintechs like Wealthsimple, we're building things from the ground up for the most part, and we have we can reimagine how they should work. And then I think crypto, I would agree. I'd say it's absolutely different, because it is not in any way and will never be reliant on centralized legacy systems. I think fundamentally, at an architectural level, it's not going to replicate what has existed historically.
Some people are threatened by brand new technologies, brand new systems, brand new elements of society, because finance is definitely an element of our society. It's an element of our life, and crypto is proposing to build that one from scratch. I'm not surprised if some people feel threatened by that. What would you say to these people? What would your response to these people be?
They threaten. Well, I'm assuming you're asking, do they feel threatened in a business sense? And I suppose my reaction, if that's what you're getting at, my response would be that's business. There will always be threats from a business perspective to an existing business. There will always be new competitors. There will always be new products that pose a competitive threat in business, and that's just part of doing business. And while I certainly don't, I don't fault anyone for responding to those threats, defending themselves against the threats, because that's equally part of business. It is still just business. It's something that traditional institutions have always, and presumably always will have to deal with.
For those listeners and viewers who do not know what crypto is, who do not know how it works, who only heard about it in connection with narratives that are not favorable, explain to them what cryptocurrency is, what blockchain is, why we use these different terms. Crash course, but assume that they're lawyers.
Right. Well, I think let's reduce it to the original and perhaps simplest use case for crypto. That's Bitcoin. And what is Bitcoin? What was it initially conceived as? It's a peer-to-peer value transfer system. It's a way for users of Bitcoin, holders of Bitcoin, to transfer value in the form of Bitcoin from themselves to someone else. And this, I think, is the key point, without a centralized intermediary. And I think that distinction, and this is, I emphasize this for a legal audience, so many of our, leaving aside crypto, all of our interactions with financial systems are mediated by financial intermediaries. If I want to send you money held in my bank, I can do that, but I'm reliant on a centralized intermediary, my bank, to take the money out of my account and put it into yours. And if we drill down on it, in fact, you're probably reliant on not just my bank, but also your bank, some other intermediaries in the process. But the transaction between me and you is intermediated by these institutions, these centralized institutions. And I think there's a key point, and I think this is where what's interesting for lawyers and what's a challenge for lawyers. So much of our regulatory system is designed around the assumption that these intermediaries will always exist, and that these intermediaries can be tapped to achieve policy objectives, regulatory objectives. They can be subject to regulatory supervision, and they can be used to achieve different objectives, whether that is preventing money laundering, whether that is assisting with the collection of taxes, and any number of policy objectives that we may all agree are laudable from a social perspective. But what Bitcoin continues to challenge is the need for these intermediaries. So that's what it does. That's what it is, I suppose, at a high level. How it does that, we don't want to, I suppose, spin off too much detail, but the idea is that Bitcoin, and I think this concept is fundamentally replicated on other types of crypto assets. It's a network. It's a network of nodes, computers, and anyone can be a node and can participate in this network and maintain a copy of the ledger, because at its heart, Bitcoin is a ledger that is recording movement of value from one place to another. But instead of it being a centralized ledger, such as the one that a bank would hold, it's decentralized in the sense that all of the nodes participating in this network have a copy of this ledger, and so what flows from that is that then they have to keep it in sync. And that's really the innovation behind. How do you have a ledger reflecting entries of who holds what, who's moving what to whom? How do you maintain that ledger in sync across all of these thousands of nodes, many of which whose identities are unknown? How do you maintain in sync? And that's the fundamental technological innovation behind it is how to do that, is what Bitcoin accomplished, which is using means of both maintaining consensus and also protecting that against attacks from hostile parties through what is referred to as proof of work. The basic idea is this: some of the nodes on the network are what are called miners. Their role is to take transactions that a movement to value that people want to do, bundling them into blocks, and then competing with one another as to what is going to be the next valid block of transactions. And I say compete because what mining refers to is really a calculation, and without going into all of the details of it, finding a particular solution to a mathematical problem that meets certain criteria, but that is hard and that cannot be done easily. And that has to be repeated literally trillions of times a second in order to find the solution. And eventually one of the miners performing these calculations will find a solution, at which point they have found the next valid block. Other nodes in the network will accept that as valid, and then the process repeats itself. So pending transactions go in, miners bundle them up to validate them, try to find a solution for the next valid block. When one of them is found, that becomes the next valid block. Everyone accepts that, and the process repeats itself. And in Bitcoin, it can take literally quadrillions of attempts, and on average about 10 minutes to find a solution for each block. But it's that work, it's the fact that is so much work that has to be done collectively that it protects the network. It protects the integrity of the ledger, because if someone wanted to reverse a transaction and rewrite history, they'd have to redo all of the work that has been done. And the concept is that should be practically infeasible to accomplish by a hostile actor. So as more and more blocks are added to the chain, it becomes harder and harder to undo what has happened in the past. And so that's how everyone can stay in sync. And that's how everyone can be confident that the copy of the ledger they hold is in fact the correct one. And that was the innovation, how to keep all of these decentralized parties who don't know one another's identities, who don't necessarily trust one another, to stay in sync. And that's the the fundamental technological innovation, and that's how it achieves what it was intended to do, which was to allow transfers of value without there having to be a bank with its central ledger moving manipulating ledger entries to transfer value from me to you.
What is it about this industry that you just described, this technology that you just described, that sounds like an elaborate game crafted by clever engineers? What is it about this industry and technology that attracts lawyers with stellar backgrounds, such as yourself, such as some of our friends down in the States that we both know about recently went in-house? What is it about this tech that is acting as a magnet to stellar talent, legal talent right now? What do you guys see in it?
I think it's a combination of things. I think, and maybe just speaking for myself, law, I think we can all agree that law is conservative in the sense that it's not prone to innovation. I mean, the whole idea, the whole system is based on precedent, looking at the past, what has happened in the past, in order to provide advice about the future. So it's not prone to revolutions or upheavals. Every so often, new areas of law will emerge that challenge the status quo, that are an upheaval of sort. I suppose I would suggest that in the generation of lawyers before you and me, privacy law was such an area of law that really didn't exist until the late 1990s, early 2000s, but now is an area of law that permeates so much of our everyday lives. There are dozens, hundreds of exceptionally talented lawyers who specialize in privacy, but it's an area of law that just didn't exist a generation ago, 30 years ago, other than in perhaps the most nascent sense. So, when that happens, it creates all sorts of interesting issues to be considered, to be advised on, and frankly, opportunities. It's always more exciting and potentially more rewarding to be practicing in a new and growing area, particularly if there are really interesting legal problems in it. And fundamentally, I strongly believe that crypto, digital assets, blockchain, whatever you want to call it, that is a technology that is profoundly affecting many areas of law. Fundamental concepts of property law, certainly securities law, certainly anti-money laundering and banking law, tax law. You can already see impacts in family law and sort of estates law. As digital assets, as blockchain continues to grow in terms of adoption by the general public, there are going to be novel legal issues that will percolate up across virtually any area of law that you can think of. And that's going to require lawyers to think about these, the technology and how it's being used and the legal issues created. And there really is no playbook, because there are some fundamentally different features of digital assets, of crypto assets, that challenge a lot of foundational assumptions of the law. And just to give an example, so much of our system of financial regulation is based on the regulation of intermediaries, banks, securities dealers, those sorts of entities. But blockchain and crypto permits not just the transfer of value, but increasingly more complex transactions, financial transactions, to be performed without such an intermediary, which is from a policy perspective, is a real regulatory challenge, because how then can regulators exercise supervision. Who do they regulate if there are no intermediaries? And what you instead have are individuals and entities transacting with one another using using addresses, blockchain addresses that are just a mix of letters and numbers. How do you regulate that kind of system? So that's a profound challenge in that area. But those challenges exist in other areas of law and will continue to crop up. And that's really, I think, for me, what drew me to it. There are just going to be so many really interesting legal issues that are going to require potentially a completely new way of looking at how to apply the law, how to draft the law, and how to advise clients. So that's really what drove me. And I think from others I know who advise in this area, it's that intellectual challenge that has attracted them as well.
How much of your work at Wealthsimple Crypto about compliance with existing regulations, and how much is about building your product to potential future rules and regulations and laws? You said that even until recently, a lot of crypto companies operated outside of the regulatory space because there were simply no laws that either applied to crypto or that regulators were interested in applying to crypto. This is changing, but it's still early, and the body of regulations has not matured. So how much of your work is just straightforward or good old compliance work? And how much of your work is really predicting regulations or maybe advocacy with regulators?
Oh, it's hard to. Certainly, there are elements of both in my role. There are, we, and I'll just provide a bit of context. As I mentioned, historically, there were always platforms that, including ones operating in Canada, that allowed customers to buy and sell crypto assets, Bitcoin, online. And I think most people will at least have heard of Quadriga CX, which collapsed in 2019, was insolvent, had to seek ultimately bankruptcy protection, and investigations by regulators, and the trustee determined that fundamentally it was a fraud perpetrated by its founder and directing mind. But Quadriga was not subject to regulation in the sense it wasn't registered with a securities regulator, or really any other type of regulator, because at the time there was no law or framework that applied to these types of businesses. Now, shortly after, in the wake of that, shortly after Quadriga collapsed in 2019, Canadian securities regulators and IROC began a process initiated by a discussion paper of as to their jurisdiction to regulate platforms like Quadriga CX. And this led, and I sort of skip to the end, Canadian security regulators take the view that platforms that are buying, selling, and holding crypto assets for their customers, in the sense that they hold wallets that have the crypto assets for their customers, so effectively acting like a crypto bank, are engaged in activities subject to securities laws, and therefore have to be registered under securities laws and are subject to regulation by provincial and territorial securities regulators and IROC. So now this is a transition. The Wealthsimple Crypto was the first platform to obtain a registration under Canadian securities laws, and that was in August of 2020. More recently, in fact, just last week, another platform secured the second such registration. And Canadian securities regulators, and particularly the OSC, have made it clear to the industry that any platform, whether in Canada or outside of Canada, that is dealing with Canadians in terms of selling, buying, selling, and holding crypto assets, has to comply with Canadian securities laws and register. So there are a number of other platforms, both in Canada and presumably outside of it that are going through the process of registering and bringing themselves into compliance with Canadian securities law. But at this time, there are really only two that are fully registered. So we have terms and conditions that apply to us. There is a certain element of obviously we have to comply with the obligations that apply to us, and then there are a variety of other matters that we have to comply with. Again, relatively recently, in the last year and a half, anti-money laundering laws have been more explicitly applied to anyone who deals in virtual currency. So we and any other platform dealing in virtual currency has to comply with sort of with Canadian federal anti-money laundering laws. We obviously have commercial relationships that have to be negotiated and maintained with custodians and liquidity providers and other service providers that help us provide the product. So there's certainly compliance and commercial responsibility, but we're also, as I say, this space is very very new, and even the regulatory bodies are consulting, seeking ideas of how to regulate. So there's a certain element of the role that are also involved in speaking with regulators about how the space should be regulated, because there are new issues that come up frequently where there really isn't a clear analog under securities laws, i.e. that is a requirement that applies to traditional securities, equities, bonds, that can be applied logically to crypto assets. Sometimes there are differences and the rules have to be modified or applied in a different way. So there's a fair bit of that, and that does involve advocacy as to what is the best way from a policy a best way of achieving a policy objective. And then there would just simply be sort of more esoterically, as new applications and technologies come down the pipe, without going into all the details, as we see the emergence of decentralized finance protocols, as we see proof of stake chains come into adoption. There are going to be all sorts of legal issues, securities legal issues, tax legal issues arising out of those technologies, and to the extent that we make them part of our product, we're going to have to work through those issues, and that's going to involve an element of advocacy as well.
No, I think it's not a completely crazy assumption that one of the worst parts of UX in crypto products is the interface with the banking system. And probably because of the wait times. People who are used to modern technological products are used to instant gratification. They're used to instant speeds, things happening right away. So, and as soon as you touch banks, you have to wait for 3 days for your deposit to be processed if you are depositing anything significant, right? So I understand that many crypto products still have to have that link in the chain, because most money is still in the banking system, and users need to get that money into the crypto product somehow. But my question is, why aren't more crypto companies actually starting their own banks? Or is it not about banks' style and business process? Is it completely about compliance and regulation, those UX issues? Why is Wealthsimple, for example, not starting a bank to solve these problems?
Just sort of objectively, it's the process, leaving aside any connection to crypto. The setting up a new bank in Canada, frankly, in any jurisdiction, is a considerable effort. It's no small feat, and I think just generally that's reflected in my knowledge of banking regulation is limited, but my perception, at least, is there have been very few new banks generally in Canada, in light of the competitive environment, the regulatory requirements, the market opportunity. But I think that just in terms of crypto, you know, if all that is required is means for clients to effect payments, you know, to buy and sell crypto, then setting up a whole new bank for that process is perhaps you know, overkill. I think what we have seen, and this has occurred recently, we have seen the emergence of other kinds of regulated institutions, specifically trust companies. There's a new trust company in Alberta, Tetra Trust, that has been established with the objective of holding crypto assets as a custodian. So, and we may see others, but that's solving I suppose, a different problem, less about payments and affecting you know, sort of providing payment rails for crypto, but providing a means for crypto assets to be held in a sort of recognized regulatory framework. So, you know, the other you know, banks and trust companies also provide an important function, leaving aside sort of consumer payments, in terms of holding assets for their clients and being subject to prudential regulation by provincial trust regulators or OSFI, and that is, you know, necessary to comply, you know, with securities laws as well as other laws. So we are, but I guess to your point, we are seeing that, and we may see more of it. As to whether that is something you know, Wealthsimple would eventually do, I can't comment. But I wouldn't say that it's not happening, and there isn't movement in that direction. Certainly on the custodial side, whether or not we, you know, we'll see someone set up a pure crypto bank, I don't know. I'm not sure if there's necessarily a product market fit for that, but who knows? But I, you know, I would say, as sort of a general comment, in general, the securities regulators have been more advanced in their thinking around how to regulate crypto assets within their sphere of jurisdiction. I think now starting to see regulators like OSFI, prudential regulators, starting to think about digital assets more. But you know, whereas the securities regulators have been looking at this field for at least a few years, it does seem that the prudential regulators are only more recently starting this kind of policy exercise of monitoring the area and seeing what rules might need to change or otherwise be adapted.
Well, you may not be starting a bank, but your job is still pretty complicated and hard. So what do crypto lawyers like you do in their spare time? Blow off some steam.
Oh, well, you know, it's I think like most people in the last year and a half, particularly those who you know, have younger kids, who spend a lot of time with their kids, and that's certainly been my experience. Is whether that's, you know, going for a bike ride with the kids, or playing sports, soccer, or something else for my kids. That's generally where I spend my time. Certainly in the last year, and I do think particularly in the last year of the pandemic, it has renewed my appreciation for the outdoors and getting out of the city. So whenever possible, you know, I enjoy that. You know, but for the pandemic, I would also like to travel more. I took my first flight in over 2 years, you know, just a couple of weeks ago. But I hope to get back to that eventually, more frequently at least.
Hey, Evan, it's been a treat to talk to you about this. I really appreciate it. I want to wish you all the best in your new gig. I think Wealthsimple was really fortunate to get you, and let's keep in touch. I know that people crave a lot of information about this area, and you are a perfect person to share and educate. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure to talk about this stuff. As you can tell, I do enjoy speaking about it, and you give me an opportunity, and I will talk your ear off. But thanks very much for giving me the time.